Hogan is a USMC veteran with over 30 years in public service. Among these are 4 years in the Marine Corps, where he served as an anti-tank infantryman and a marksmanship instructor. 10 years as a part-time police officer and 25 years working in state government doing security work and supervision. Doug also teaches seminars on leadership and anti-totalitarianism, as is reflected in his best-selling books, Oath Takers and Surviving Martial Law. And we have some books back here for after the meeting if you'd like to look at those. He can be contacted on Facebook for public speaking engagements. Give a warm welcome to Doug Hogan. Doug, take it away.
Thank you. I really like all this. I'm really super excited to be here, and what a classy looking, great, good looking group of people we got here. This is like, I usually wear like a polo shirt and khaki pants, and now I feel like I shouldn't be here. It's like, you guys look really nice. You're dressed nice and formal. And this is the one time I send a message, I'll say, can I just wear, blue jeans and a shirt? Yeah, sure. Yeah, regretting that. No more. All right, welcome. I'm glad that you're here, and thank you so much for inviting me out. This is one of my topics that I've written a book on back here in the corner, and it's called Surviving Martial Law. It started out a PowerPoint when I was doing book signing events a long time ago. I figured out at book signing events that if I was to teach a class, that I would get a free vending table, and I wouldn't have to pay $100, $200 for a vending table. So I made a PowerPoint, and I started getting free tables to sell my books at. So it became kind of a cool thing where I could just do a PowerPoint and sell a book, or sell a book and teach and get invitations to groups like this and talk about it. But a little bit of my bio, because I got plenty of stuff going on here. But we're going to talk a little bit about the what, where, who, where, the hows, and the whys of martial law, because everybody wants to know. It's a frightening couple of words. Martial law, martial rule is another term you might hear people say. It's the same thing. It's military rule, living under the military. We'll get into that a little bit more. Also, while I'm thinking about it, you might be tempted to raise your hand and ask questions along the way. Let's save those if we can towards the end of the class. If we have time left over, then we'll do that. If not, I promise you there's a lot of content in this, and the book was based off this content. So if you want to zip on out of here and you missed something, or you have questions, you don't want to stick around, it's in the book. Anyway, there's that. So what you can expect in this class, I am a constitutionalist. I believe in small government. I believe it's a good thing. But big government is a bad thing. It's overreaching. I don't believe, and a lot of you are familiar with the Federalist Papers. There is a lot of argumentation going along, and a lot of ideology and discussions back when our Constitution was written. And a lot of people believed in a strong centralized government, and others believed in a small limited government. And so there was a lot of negotiating that went on along the way. But I believe, that small government is a good thing, but big governments can be overreaching and too powerful. Therefore, any anti-government references in this session are directed toward those overreaching branches, not the government itself. While I am not a fan of big government, I see a need for a select few agencies, others I don't. My opinions on the topics herein are my own, and it's not my intention to sway opinions or to convert ideologies. You might have your way of thinking about things, but most of the things I'm talking about in here I'm providing resources. So it's just not my opinion. There's resources, and I have resources in the back of my book also. So everything that I show you, there'll be some pictures, some very frightening things the government's doing, some very frightening things the government's done, and some very frightening things that the government's talking about doing. Don't expect to hear anti-police or anti-military rhetoric. I'm a veteran. I was in the Marines for 4 years. How many Marines we have in here? Hoorah, Semper Fi. How many wanted to be in the Marines? You Army guys.
Those are fighting words.
I know, but it's a sibling rivalry thing. We love each other regardless. How many law enforcement officers in here? Any law enforcement? I'm a police officer also. I've been 10 years part-time police. I had 25 years Illinois state government. I was a sheriff's deputy for a while, so I've done a little bit of all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to be talking any kind of anti-military rhetoric or anti-police rhetoric. There's a lot of, we'll talk more about that later, but it's not going to be a lot of rhetoric involved. I'm both a law enforcement officer and a military vet. I will cover the best case scenarios as well as some worst case scenarios regarding martial law. Expect to see things that may shock you. Some of you probably do your homework because this looks like a smart crowd. You've probably already seen some of the things that I'm going to show you, and so it won't be a shock at all. And some of the things that I'm going to share with some of you, you might not have knowledge of it. Be like, oh, well, it's not shocking that the government's doing that kind of a thing. Expect cited sources. Some material that will be presented may be subjective, while other materials will be objective. No matter the influence, there will be legitimate photographic and/or internet site sources. It's up to you, the individual, to determine how viable it is. In other words, go do your own homework. I encourage everybody to do their own homework. Just don't believe anything that's fed to you. That's why we have people who walk around with Kool-Aid stains all over their lips, because everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid. Before you know how to survive under martial law, you must know about martial law. There'll be a lot of information that I'll try to move through rapidly. So to those of you who've heard me speak, well, I don't think anybody here's ever heard me speak, maybe on some videos. You probably already know that I'm going to have a hard time covering everything that I've prepared. So we'll look at martial law and attempt to define it. We'll look at who can declare martial law, things that might lead us to expect that martial law rule is imminent, what will happen when we hear the inevitable words, life under military rule, FEMA. When I first started hearing FEMA, I was like, oh, it's like a fictional thing. It's not really real. Well, it's real, and they got their own building and everything, so it's real. Surviving under martial law. Some shady things the government's been doing under the guise of safety and security, because they're always trying to sell stuff as being safe and secure. They just want to take care of us, right? They care about our health. They care about our well-being, and they want us, and dealing with martial law. So, here it is. Article 1, Section 8. Congress shall have the power to, there's a lot of things enumerated in the Constitution that Congress has the power to do. But I'm focusing tonight on martial law. So Congress shall have the power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections and repel invasions. That's it, guys. That's all the Constitution says about martial law. So there's a lot of defining and head scratching going on. That's it. That's all the Constitution says. So it's up to us to do some homework, to look at case laws, to look at some history, to maybe look at some other countries to kind of define and put everything into a nutshell so we have an understanding what martial law is, what martial law could be. Note that there's no clear definition in the Constitution itself as to what martial law is. And it's like that in all kinds of government. If you've ever worked for a municipal government, if you've ever worked for a county government, state government, federal government, they write policies as clear as mud. And a lot of that's done that way so that they can define things later on. I was a low-level management. I was supervisor for 10 years where I worked in state government, and I wrote some policies. And I know that there's a way to write policy and there's a way to not write policy. The way to not write policy is to make things so difficult that it comes back and bites you in the tail. And so that's exactly what the government doesn't want to do. They want to leave things open-ended so that they can decide how the ending happens, how to write out the ending. Additionally, in 1946, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that martial law carries no precise meaning. In Duncan versus, don't ask me to pronounce it, I'm going to try. Kahanamaku, 327 U.S. 304. So what is martial law according to the definition, people? And this is from Encyclopedia Britannica, the first definition here. The temporary rule by military authorities of designated area and time of emergency when the civil authorities are deemed unable to function. The legal effects of a declaration of martial law differ in various jurisdictions, but they generally involve a suspension of normal civil rights, things we call habeas corpus, and the extension to the civilian population, summary military justice. And some of you that were in the veterans, Army, Marines, Navy, Air Force, UCMJ, you guys are familiar with that. The Uniform Code of Military Justice. Although temporary in theory, a state of martial law may in fact continue indefinitely. So according to Merriam-Webster, they say, the law administered by military forces that is invoked by government in emergency when the civilian law enforcement agencies are unable to maintain public order and safety. So these guys are making these definitions off of that little phrase and what the Constitution says. Right there. So Merriam-Webster and Encyclopedia Britannica looked at this and said, this is what it means. So you read what the Constitution says. So who can declare martial law? The most direct answer is, constitutionally, Congress. However, who's in charge of the military? Who's the commander-in-chief? The President of the United States is, right? Can Congress make any decisions at all? They have proven themselves, and the farther we go into time, the more difficult it becomes for the left wing and the right wing to get along. The space between them, the gap, the chasm is so huge at this point that there's almost no reconciling. There's extreme left and extreme right. There's nothing down the middle anymore. But Congress occasionally lacks the competence to agree on bills, let alone enact martial law. Now, the executive office of the President of the United States is the most likely unit of government to do it because, like I said, he's the commander-in-chief. It's been said that martial rule cannot be enacted while the civilian courts are operational. Keep in mind that the civilian courts do not govern the military, and it would be the military that would determine when the civilian courts are safe enough to use. And have you ever seen a tyrannical government give power back to the people once it's been taken? No. It's never happened. Now, we could look back in time, and if we could go back and do some time travel to the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, there was some martial law. It was kind of jurisdictional, it was sectional, and it was a very sensitive time. But it eventually did go back. But I'm talking about a totalitarian, tyrannical government, which is what we're seeing right now, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. It will never go back once it's been taken away. Once we give our power and our rights to the government, don't expect to get it back. Many believe that we rely on our elected officials to keep things in check, but it must be noted that we have seen an influx of politicians with little to no regard for the law of the land. And we'll cover some of that here in a little bit. So how many times has martial law happened throughout history? Martial law has only been enacted once in U.S. history, and like I said, that was the Civil War. Hawaii, some people would argue, was under a state of martial law for 3 years from the onset of the Pearl Harbor attack in 1942. However, Hawaii was not the 50th state until 1959. It was just a territory. And I know that nobody here was there when it happened, but historically we know that a whole bunch of Japanese persons were rounded up and they were jailed up because we knew that Japan had attacked us, but we didn't know who. And of course, we're paranoid of communism and Japan in general, so they just started rounding up. Hawaii went under lockdown. On September 15th, 1863, Lincoln imposed congressionally authorized martial law. So Congress said, okay, let's do this. The authorizing act allowed the president to suspend habeas corpus throughout the entire United States. Habeas corpus is your Fifth Amendment. It's your right to a fair and a speedy trial. The guys we have right now that are sitting over because 3 years ago, the January 6th thing, all those guys that were arrested are still sitting in jail, have not had their day in trial yet. They've been sitting in jail for 3 years. That's habeas corpus. They have a Fifth Amendment right to a fair and speedy trial. That's an example of it. That will be the case wherever martial law is called out on. Lincoln opposed the suspension of prisoners of war, spies, or aiders and abettors of the enemy, as well as some other classes of people, such as draft dodgers. The president's proclamation was challenged in Ex parte Milligan. The Supreme Court ruled that Lincoln's imposition of martial law by way of suspension of habeas corpus was unconstitutional as long as civilian courts are operational. Here's the catch-all with that. So Lincoln says, okay, well, Congress enacted martial law. It went across the entire United States. So habeas corpus, you got sections, regional areas where we have Confederates, and spies, say here, abettors, prisoners of war, those kind of individuals, locked up. They don't get a speedy trial. But there's other parts of the United States where there's no action. Okay? So the issue was, in those areas, the courts were still operational. So there should not be a martial rule there, was what the Supreme Court was saying. Habeas corpus was suspended to gain control over the insurrection and rebellion that endangered the Constitution and government of the United States. And I got that information there from Abraham Lincoln's Proclamation 113, declaring martial law and further suspension of the writ of habeas corpus in Kentucky. So you saw earlier when I opened up Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the definition of martial law that was given. In the word insurrection and invasion, we're seeing a lot of invasion right now. So the question might come, well, could we be seeing maybe possibly a time where there could be a martial law? The Constitution says yes. It would actually be constitutional, although they're denying that it's an invasion right now. It could be at some point an eye-opening moment for Biden when he has clear cognition to say, you know what, let's just have martial law. Let's just do martial law because we are being invaded. And that would be constitutional. However, in the states where there's no invasion, right, habeas corpus would still go on, so we can't have martial law in those areas. So the Supreme Court's already ruled on that. In the Milligan case I talked about a while ago. But here's the definition of insurrection: an act or instance of revolting against civil authority or an established government. Basically, that could be anything. January 6th is a big example. But let's go back a little bit further. Some of the Michael Brown situation. Was that Ferguson, Missouri? That. Martial law could have gone right there because that was crazy. Cops were being assassinated. They were being shot from buildings, looting, there was burning, and things were, people were tearing the whole city up. And there was no order. The authorities the police cars were being caught on fire, they'd be burnt and destroyed. That could have been a martial law kind of scenario. Now that we know a little bit about martial law, let's look at what can happen. The U.S. Constitution permits the government to declare martial law to suppress insurrection and repel invasion. Things that can start a revolt against authority include, but not limited to, widespread civil unrest, like I just said, anarchy, which most likely lead to, quote unquote, a national emergency, which is vaguely defined in several executive orders. And this executive order, 13603, everybody, you know what that is? Anybody, just off the top of your head? Good, we'll talk about that. The definition for insurrection, I keep hitting this button, I'm going to rotate this. The definition for insurrection is vague at best. It can be defined as a violent uprising or rebellion against authority. Executive Order 13603 was written to maintain technological superiority in its national defense equipment during peacetime and in times of national emergency. National emergency is written 4 times in this 10-page executive order and never once is actually defined. It can literally be anything that executive or legislative branches deem to be a crisis. And here's what I have my problem with what I talked about a while ago, the writing policies. What if the current president says this is what insurrection means, or this is what invasion means, and he defines it on his own, and then the next president might not see it that way. So then we got 2 wide spectrums of something that we might want to try to turn. They might want to try to say, you know, right now this is what it is, but later on when a different president comes in with very opposing views, then they might not want it to mean that. It can't be vague. It has to be spelled out by people who are not partisan. It can literally be anything that the executive or legislative branches deem to be a crisis. What is a crisis? I mean, it could be anything. This single executive order is an executive equivalence to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution. This broadens the spectrum from insurrection and invasion to any type of crisis. So this executive order, because crisis and emergency is not defined, it takes what the Constitution says can happen for martial law and makes it very, very vague by throwing in the word crisis and emergency, and these are all the things that we can do. We're going to talk about it in a second. It gets crazy. But some things could be, for example, an economic collapse, which is coming. We're talking about digital currency. Folks, the digital currency is the beginning of the end. Christians, raise your hands. A lot of you, good. You guys have read in the Bible about, in the book of Revelation, the mark that's going to go in the right hand with a number of the name, of your name, okay? You guys know what a barcode is? Any product that you buy from the store has a barcode on it. Underneath that barcode is a number. That number is tied to the information about that product. So you scan that barcode, and it goes back to a server, and the server spills out everything about that product that you just purchased. That same material, that same technology that's going to go into the human hand. So a number would be assigned to you, so if they scan that, it would go back to a server, and everything about you would be known. What you spend your money on, what kind of food you eat, your health insurance, your car insurance, your life insurance, where you work, your medical history, everything. And if the government don't like what you're buying, they shut your bank off. It's the beginning of the end. Multiple organized riots. Situations like we saw during the Michael Brown case, for example. Widespread natural disasters. Can you imagine if Yellowstone erupted? It would be insane. Political dissension, I'm sorry. So just prior to martial law, you could probably expect a few precursors. Curfews, for example, travel restrictions, checkpoints, rationing, censorship, excessive military operations. We've been seeing a lot of those lately. In civilian areas, such as, you familiar with J-15? Remember that big old multi-state, multi-military operation? Rapid inflation, we've been seeing a lot of that lately. Unusual government purchases, we've been seeing out. The government's been buying up ammunition. A lot of times you can't even go to the store and find it anymore because the government's bought it all up. Increased regulation. We see a lot of that in the really liberal cities. Huge regulations in the states. Huge regulations. It's all out of hand. But these type of precursors are very, very good indicators that there may be an impending state of martial law coming. I would expect that such things would be done to avoid it, but in reality, they violate basic human rights and the American spirit, because we, by definition, we're creatures of rebellion. We were born of rebellion. This country is born of rebellion. Our spirit is rebellious. This is how we are as Americans. So resistance will be defined as insurrection. I wrote a book one time called Acts of Defiance, where the good guys became the bad guys. Basically, in my story, there was the borders were wide open. Nobody was enforcing border control. Immigrants were flooding over. Next thing you know, the terrorists were with them. All kinds of unwelcome people were coming over, and they started blowing themselves up and tearing up the United States, and then the government wasn't doing anything, and then the right-wing extremists started defending themselves and started acting as the police and doing the government's job because the government wasn't doing anything, and then the right-wing extremists became the domestic terrorists, and the good guys are now the bad guys, the bad guys are now the good guys, and lo and behold, that's where we're at now. It's crazy how that works, ain't it? Once a state of martial law has been declared, resistors will be reclassified as domestic terrorists and disturbers of the peace. So that's something to think about, because we're all, at that point, will be considered rebels and insurrectionists. So we're going to get to that big executive order that I just talked about here in a minute. But look at this. The best way to know what's likely to happen during martial law is to look at some of the executive orders that some of our previous presidents wrote. Executive Order 1997. And these are in case of an emergency. Remember, that is not defined in any executive order. The federal government can seize all electric power, all petroleum and gas, solid fuels, minerals. That was by John F. Kennedy in 1962. He also wrote Executive Order 10998 in case of emergency, and all these are in case of emergency. The government can seize food resources, all farms, all fertilizers, all facilities. And he wrote 10995 can seize all telecommunications. Executive Order 10999 can seize all transportation and production of and distribution of materials. So that can mean anything really, anything that you buy. Executive Order 1099, transportation, the production and distribution of law. I just covered that. Executive Order 11000, manpower management. You guys know what that is?
Slave labor.
Slave labor, he said. Basically, the government can say, hey, need you, come here. And remember, at this point, you're under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. At this point, habeas corpus has been shut down. At this point, there is no operational court systems. At this point, the military is in charge. And if you've never been in the military, let me tell you, there are no rights. There is no constitution there's no rights for you. It's very different. Executive Order 11003, the government can seize air travel, all airports. In Chicago Airport right now, they got one giant section of the whole building roped off and a wall put up with signs on it that says, do not enter. And on the other side of that wall is a whole bunch of illegal immigrants. They're letting them live there. And that's going on all over the United States, these sanctuary cities, these sanctuary states. Air travel, airports, operating facilities. Executive Order 11004, the government can seize all housing and community facilities. Executive Order 11490, now we're into Richard Nixon. He wrote that the government can seize all federal departments and agencies, and they will control all the U.S. citizens, churches, and businesses. That's frightening. How many of you was watching the news during COVID, and all the reporters was badgering Trump's press secretary because the churches were still open? I'm like, it's the same right. It's the same amendment that gives you the freedom of the press. It's the First Amendment to peaceably assemble. It's the right to practice your religion, your freedom of expression, the freedom of the press. That's both of them is the First Amendment. So what the hypocrites? They could sit there in that room, not shut down, and complain that people are going to church. So who's familiar with Snopes? Yeah, don't go there.
I know.
They're in bed with the left. Extremely liberal organization that always errs on the side of the left.
Fact-checking.
Actually, it's where the fact checking I think came from. It's where it all started.
Right.
And so I was curious one day. I knew, because I do a lot of homework. I wrote a book about this. I did a ton of research. I wrote several books about this. Did a ton of research. So I went and just to Snopes to see what will they say about this. Did President Barack Obama write an executive order giving the president unprecedented powers in times of national emergency? Well, what did they say? They said false. So I screenshotted this and I included it in this PowerPoint presentation. And now I want to show you the truth. Executive Order 13603, and you might know it as National Defense Resources Preparedness Act. The executive can seize all water, all human and animal food, transportation, all energy, all construction materials, all health resources, all farm equipment, all fertilizers, all fuels, on and on and on. If you look at this executive order, every single thing in this executive order contains all the executive orders by Kennedy and Nixon. He just took them all and put them into one. So in the time of a national emergency, it doesn't matter. Here's the problem with this. It doesn't matter who the president is. This is what I was saying a while ago. You write this policy, now any president that comes after you can invoke this. And they don't make it go away. They don't pull this out and write something new and say, it's not like a tag they can take off the wall and throw it away. It's not like a little sticky note. It goes to the National Archives, and there it sits forever. This executive order gives unprecedented power to any sitting president, and it combines all the previous 9 executive orders into one easy-to-remember executive law. It was signed March 16, 2012. I'm not going to read all of this, but the important thing down here I want you to look at is in the yellow. The United States must have an industrial and technological base capable of meeting national defense requirements and capable of contributing to the technological superiority of its national defense equipment in peacetime and in times of national emergency. Now, I don't like those two things together, peacetime and national emergency. It just doesn't seem right. It seems like there's some room in there to say, well, I know we're at peacetime, but we really need this executive order. I just don't like it. So military law. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution states, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus, that persons arrested to be brought before a judge, basically your Fifth Amendment right, shall be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. This section of the Constitution makes it legal to suspend civilian court proceedings during martial law. It must be noted that civilians employed by the military are sometimes subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That being said, the National Defense Resource Preparedness Act, or Executive Order 13603, authorized the government to create labor forces. So, like I said a while ago, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, it's a law that governs the military. It's not like the law that governs civilians. It's a lot different. You can't even leave 20 miles away from your base without permission. You can't get a tattoo. They do it, but they sneak it. There's so many things. The laws are a lot more stricter. You can go to jail for disobeying. They call it the brig. It's a lot different. And the scary part is, because there's no courts, there'll be what's called tribunals. Have you guys heard of military tribunals? Basically, whoever the highest ranking person is on the field is the supreme judge, jury, and executioner. The law requires the President of the United States, acting as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, to write rules and regulations to implement military law. So if Congress can't make a decision for martial law, and the President said, hey, I'm going to do this because he's been doing things that are unconstitutional anyway, he's been writing executive laws, which isn't his job, but he's been doing it. So let's say he said, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Military, we're going to do some martial law here. Now, he's the one in charge. He's the one writing the rules. Uniform Code of Military Justice is the foundation of military law in the United States. It applies to all members of the uniformed services of the United States. So what to expect? Well, there's going to be suspension of many rights, such as habeas corpus, your Sixth Amendment. Unreasonable searches and seizures, your Fourth Amendment. Freedom of association, your First Amendment. Freedom of movement and curfews, just a basic human right. Confiscation of firearms, your Second Amendment. Removal from property, your Fourth Amendment. Confiscation of all food and water supplies, another basic human right. Detainment, possibly indefinite, because remember, there's no public courts. So life under the Military Code of Military Justice will apply to all persons of the military and some civilian personnel applied by the military. So how will it affect us? Well, the military only knows one law and it answers only to one code. Now I want you to think for a second. You got a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds out there. 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Don't know anything. Nothing. But the military. And trust me, because I know about young police officers. I'm 51 years old. I don't like young police officers. I'll say that right now. They're just too gung-ho. I like a little wisdom behind their ear, just a little experience, a little bit of age, slow down a little bit there, Tiger, take it easy. It's just like that in the military. These young guys get in there and they're really gung-ho, and they will do whatever they're told to do. They say that oath, and half of them are so scared when they're saying the oath, they don't even know what they're saying. Civilian workforces will be governed by the UCMJ. Life under Uniform Code of Military Justice will be difficult for any person with no knowledge of what it's like to live in the military. It would actually be a culture shock. If you've ever served in the military and martial law comes back on, you jump right back into the swing of things. It won't be hard. But for anybody else, it will be a culture shock. The rules are very strict and the punishments are very, very steep. Capital punishment, crimes would include things like open rebellion against authorities. So right now, we call it a First Amendment freedom of expression, to peaceably assemble, right? A real peaceful protest, If you do that in the UCMJ, under UCMJ, that's rebellion. The definition is very different. Actions or speeches that incite rebellion. So I can say something and you might not like it, that's too bad, because there's no constitutional right protecting your feelings from being hurt, right? But in Uniform Code of Military Justice, there's no such thing. If you say something that offends the wrong person, you're in trouble. Aiding the enemy. Who's the enemy? Now we're in the shade. Who's the enemy? Who's writing the definitions? Who's writing the laws? Espionage. If I see you whispering to somebody, and I'm the commander-in-chief, or the president told me to do something, and I'm a commander on the field, I'm the supreme law out there. And I see you whispering to somebody that I think is a conspirator, you might be in trouble. Because those things are all subjective points of view. So rebellion against who? Is rebellion defense of liberty? You see what I'm saying? Because you decide, hey, I want to protect my liberty, I'm going to go freedom. No, you might be seen as an insurrectionist. So who's the enemy? Who's asking the question? If you're asking questions, is that espionage? Could be. See how scary it could get? Now, the crummy thing about FEMA is, there's some executive orders we're going to talk about here in a minute, where FEMA's put in charge of everything. And who here's worked in any kind of government? One, two, there's several of you. Have you ever worked with NIMS, National Emergency or National Incident Management Systems? FEMA, it's like a house of cards. It relies wholeheartedly and completely on smaller governments to function. It's loosely organized. It depends on the state, the county, and municipal, depend on them to do their job correctly. It lacks the financial backing that is required to run independently. In the event of a martial law scenario, it's likely that federal government will move to make leadership and organizational changes necessary to operate on a wide-scale basis, as it simply lacks structure. FEMA needs security forces to operate. They don't have an army of their own. In the event of martial law on a national level, the federal government would have to rely on foreign assistance. There's simply not enough U.S. military, police, sheriffs, deputies, and personnel to control all the major U.S. cities, let alone the rural areas of America. I actually did the numbers. There's only about 100,000 peacekeepers globally, and China keeps pitching in several thousand here and there. Go figure. So here's the numbers. United States active duty, and this is recent, just a year old. United States active duty and reserves military is 2,063,451. That's all the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force. If you're in the Coast Guard, I'm sorry. Law enforcement, 708,000. That total comes up to 2,771,532. Now, the U.S. land mass is only 3,531,905 square miles. So that's less than one person to cover 1 square mile of land mass. Now, that simply won't work in Missouri. That simply won't work even in Illinois, where I'm from. Now, picture how big Chicago is, for example. And what's the biggest city in Missouri? Anybody? St. Louis? So those places are going to burn first. So what would you think the powers that be is going to do? They're going to pull everybody out of the rural areas and move them into the cities to try to maintain control. In order for FEMA to fully function on a national level during a time of national crisis, it needs to have control over all government agencies. Enter Executive Order 13010. FEMA takes control of all government agencies. Signed July 15, 1996 by Bill Clinton. Scary. I've done a lot of training with FEMA, being a police officer. A lot of classes are required, a lot of annual, or every 2 years getting on. Boring. But you gotta trust me. You guys saw what happened in Hurricane Katrina. It was a disaster. If the smaller governments aren't doing their part, it's not gonna work. But just so you know, FEMA's not a myth. I've never seen a FEMA camp, but I've seen things that make me go, FEMA is divided into 10 regions. If you've ever read my book, The Tyrant Trilogy, which is back there, it starts off in southern Illinois, not too far from here. You might remember the painted letter V that were on the sides of the rail cars and the storage containers on the barges. That's because Illinois is under Region 5 of FEMA. It breaks everything down in the United States into 12 regions. And here it is. So where are you at? That's your FEMA number. You are FEMA Region 7. For food caches, something away from your home, you don't want to blaze a footpath. Imagine now, because remember I said the petroleum products, gasoline, oil, all that's going to be stopped. The production of it's going to be stopped. You're not going to be allowed to have any, unless the government says you can. If you get maybe a work pass, you might be allowed to get some gas so you can go to work and come back. But imagine now your grass is growing tall because they're preserving fuel, because we don't know how long this is going to last. So they're preserving fuel. They don't want you to mow your yard, and then they come to your house. Let's say some Chinese peacekeepers, some blue hats come over, all right, and they come to your yard and they're hungry, and they see a path from your front door to your back door going through the tall weeds back there. Where do you think that's going to? Well, probably to a food source, probably to a supply stash of some kind. And they're going to follow it over and see where it's coming from. So you want to have some alternate locations. Only acquire food from off-site locations when necessary. Minimize the number of times you have to visit the cache location, and never use a set routine, because you want a few storms to blow in. You want the wind to kind of brush your trail off a little bit. You don't want to blaze a trail through there so it looks like you've got a trail made, like a deer trail. You can recognize those if you're hunters. You'll be making a deer trail made out of human feet going to your food supply. Gardens are beneficial, however, you should expect authorities to indulge themselves. Keeping a small garden on your property would lower suspicion. If there's absolutely no food to be found in your home or on your property, they'll know that you're concealing it. So you want to keep a little garden somewhere so they you're not throwing suspicion into the air. You got a huge garden, who you feeding? Well, it's for me. Well, we're going to take some because we're hungry. Likewise, when it comes to rabbits, chickens, and other small food sources, should be maintained in at least two separate locations. Keep one on hand and one off your property. These are things I think of just because I write fiction books. And trust me, when you're laying in bed at night and the stories are coming to you, you got all these ideas of, well, what happens then? What happens then? What if they do this and this? What would your reaction be? And you come up with all these different ideas to do things and how to conceal things. And then you talk to other people that are like-minded and you come up with these different ideas. And so I share them with you. Keep one on hand and one off property. Change up the structure design in garden produce. Remember to keep the on-hand supply small to a minimum, because you don't want that to be confiscated. Possession of firearms and ammunition will raise suspicion. That will probably get you in a lot of trouble, actually. You're not allowed to have your own firearms in the military. Everything's issued out to you. So, an off-site location where firearms can be concealed is ideal. If you're like me, you will be incapable of not having a weapon or ammunition handy. Use a good hiding spot. Think outside of the box and try not to limit your imagination. Always suspect your weapon's hiding spot is not good enough and that it will be discovered. This will drive your creativity. You literally have to think, how would they think? It's like when you're writing, if anybody here reads crime books. I worked with sex offenders for 8 years. I don't want to be in their head, but in order to know how they think, because you work around them a lot and you want to protect your children, right? You got to protect your children. You got to think about, well, what would they do? How would they think? How, would they go to this environment? Would they? And by getting inside their head and knowing what they would do protects my children, because now I know how to protect my children from pedophiles. And it's the same thing here. Well, you got to get inside the head of the other team, the other force. Information is going to be a form of currency. The authority, we'll just call them the authority. The authority will want information. It's for this reason: you must not talk to anyone you do not trust 100%. I'll say 1,000%. Sharing information with neighbors about your hiding spots could come back to haunt you, because they too want to be left alone. Snitching on you would take the attention off of them, and they would earn the authority's trust in the process. So assume that the authority figures are good at detecting dishonesty. Knowledge is power, but only if you know how to use it. Survival groups. Survival groups will try to get an early foothold. Prepare yourself to defend against looters, especially if you live out in the country or you live in some urban area. Do what you're told when the authorities tell you to do it. Some exceptions apply. You'll know it when it happens. I can't come up here and play what ifs with you all night long. You have to think when the time comes how you're going to react and what you're going to do. And things are never the same from person to person. So trust nobody and remain cautiously optimistic. You just can't be, it's all gloom and doom and just curl up in a corner and waste away and die. Store medical supplies in a cool, dry place. Avoid temperature extremes when hiding medicines. So the question is, do you resist or do you submit? Well, the answer depends on the authority's force. Who's coming? Is it one person, two person? How many you got in your group? Remember, if you take them out and somebody knows where they're at, more people's going to come looking for them. Stockpile, bartering goods that serve a dual purpose. Alcohol and medical supplies will both be very high valuable supplies. Things you won't want to barter with include things like ammunition and weapons. Of course, you want to keep those away from everybody else. Keep those to yourself, which should be hidden off-site. So here's where we're getting into the scary parts. You sure I got enough time? Because I'm going to cover some.
You're good.
Okay.
I'll stop you.
All right. Yeah. You tell me when I'm 10 minutes out. We talked about Nevada earlier. Remember the Bundy Ranch standoff? You remember this? The federal government came down and they actually put up signs where you could practice your First Amendment right. In 2014, we saw an armed Bureau of Land Management fast roping down from helicopters, firearms on their backs, in their hands, to face off with some ranchers in Clark County, Nevada, and they set up free speech zones. I thought the Constitution was law of land. I didn't think it was law of little sections of property here. But hey, we're living in times where the Constitution is neglected and is being neglected hard. Heard some politicians say it's just an antiquated piece of paper. In 2020, we began to see unprecedented amounts of censorship on social media. Moderators called fact checkers were hired to ghost any narratives that were counterproductive to those being served by the Center for Disease Control and the World Health Organization. I've been banned off of everything. I just go back and make another account. And it's frustrating because, like I said, I'm an author and I'm a podcaster and I like a bass. And it's frustrating when I get my voice is taken away. But here's my thing. The Constitution protects us from the government. It's supposed to. It doesn't protect us from Facebook. It doesn't protect us from Instagram. It doesn't protect us from TikTok. That's their house, and there's social media sites that are liberal, and we all know that. So if we go on there expressing our views, well, you might as well consider the possibility that you might, since you're in their house, they don't want you to talk about those things, you might get banned. Here's the problem, and that's not a violation of the Constitution. But it is a violation of the Constitution when a presidential administration reaches out to these social media sites and tells them to suppress conservative thoughts, conservative opinions, conservative voices. That is against the Constitution. And when this first started happening, I'm like, they did it again. I wasn't that mad about it because I said what I had to say and I got kicked out. It's their house. If they came into my house, said something I didn't like, I'd make them leave too. But then I found out later on that the government was telling them to censor conservative voices. And that made me mad because then my rights were being violated. This irks me to no end. Everything you see in red there is federal land. And that's the one picture I can find. And that's an older picture. I got this in 2014. Harry Reid, I'm so glad he retired. He was awful. But Nancy Pelosi and Schumer, they're stepping up. The Constitution gives the government authority over land for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Those are military buildings. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that federal land could be purchased for, or land could be purchased by the federal government for parks. So all this stuff that's going on right now in Texas, baloney. That's not even constitutional. That's not even constitutional. The federal government has no right constitutionally to a park. How many of you have heard of the Utah Data Center? Everybody here probably has one of these on them. Smart man. Wow, you got me. Yeah. Everything you text to every person, all your contacts, everything you visit, your social media sites, your passwords, everything about you that you put in this phone, everything that you share with somebody, everything that you share into this phone gets stored here into this place called the Utah Data Center. And I'm taking this right here, right from the Utah Data Center website. I put a link on there that I didn't hook my Wi-Fi to this, but you can check it out for yourself. Like everything I'm posting to you, I'm bringing the receipts for everything I'm talking about. You can go there and check it out. And it says there on the website, the men and women of the Domestic Surveillance Directorate, together and individually, act for one thing and one thing alone. We act for the good of the nation. That's why I said a while ago, safety and security, everything's brought to us in the guise of safety and security. Each employee takes a solemn oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Okay. Our vision, domestic information dominance through responsive presence and network advantage. What's it say about our values? Well, their values, it says, for us, collaboration is built into the very fabric of who we are, a component of both the U.S. Defense Department and U.S. intelligence community. We also partner with other federal agencies to safeguard our national security. Domestic surveillance is a team sport. They got bad words. Bad words. It's a team sport. No one organization has the resources to do the job alone. So here's how it works. You see the citizens' data. So I pull out my phone, everything I showed you, the websites I visit, the phone calls I make, the Skype calls, everything. It goes into the data center. They match it with stuff. They store it or they share it with other places, other agencies. And then it gets spitted out over here, and they decide if they're going to act on it or not. Under this president, Biden, and I remember with Obama, there were a lot of the veterans at some point were being red labeled. So we were called dangerous persons because we have military training and we're trained to fight and we're trained to do these things. And so we're put on a list of possible dangerous persons, possible national threats, that kind of stuff. So I was, and you, if you're in the military, was red taped and going into this data system and shared with these. I'm telling you, because of all these books and research I've done, they got to be watching me, because I looked up everything you can possibly imagine about surviving and prepping and did all kinds of research on the United Nations, all this stuff. All this stuff came out of my researches. So because I've done a tremendous amount of research on patriotism and tyranny and terrorism and stuff like that, U.S. history, other things like that, I got myself in a situation where I'm vulnerable to surveillance and monitoring. So my guess is that maybe some of you have done similarly. So we're powerless to prevent everything that's happening. There's things we can do. I was talking earlier. I personally want to get involved in politics in some way, some fashion. I've done a lot, I think, a lot of service stuff. But that's one thing I haven't done yet. But that's something I can do. Start attending some county meetings, some county committee meetings, and see what's going on, and just sit around for a while. Maybe start voicing my opinion and start getting more involved. And that's what I want to do to help. But our focus must be to learn and to deal with things like martial law because we can't necessarily prevent it. We need to learn to deal with it, because the totality of circumstances should be thoroughly weighed out before responding to it. For example, consider the area affected. What forces are involved? Are they domestic or foreign forces? I'm going to treat some of our homegrown boys different than I'm going to treat some foreign people coming in with blue helmets on. Fighting against the authorities is a bad idea unless you have an army, because they'll always come back with more. Outright hiding isn't a good idea either. Martial law lasted for 2 years during the second half of the Civil War. It lasted 3 years in Hawaii over the Pearl Harbor attack. People think about living off the grid in these type of situations, but you got to consider the consequences if you and your family are discovered by foreign forces. It might be okay if some homegrown guys find you, but those foreign ones, not so much. Because remember, like I said a while ago, there's simply not enough land mass for our own people to police us. It's going to have to be a foreign force coming in to help. Limit your movement to foot unless it becomes absolutely necessary. Transportation will be controlled and fuel will be confiscated, because the drilling is going to be limited. It'd be prudent to consider siphoning fuel from your vehicle to prevent it from being taken by or destroyed. Bury the canisters off-site somewhere off your property, somewhere where it's inconspicuous. In that way, later on down the road, if you need it for some kind of emergency, you'll have it. Don't dress in camouflage fatigues and clothing and look like a military, like a militia guy. I mean, you got to blend in. It's a bad idea to give the authority the impression that you're anything other than cooperative. You don't want them to look at you and say, "Oh, there's a threat right there," and then you got guns on you. You want to appear poised and just kind of humble and like you're just blending in and you're cooperative. Maintain a low profile and don't attract attention. You don't want your name to become known unless you want the attention. Listen, don't talk. Information can save your life. Be smart with the information you collect. Attacking a supply convoy that was discussed in your presence will draw all the authorities back to you. It's a no-brainer, right? Remain humble and non-confrontational. Cooperation relates to non-threatening for authority figures. Nobody suspects a friendly, quiet, and cooperative civilian. Have a plan to defend yourself, firearms, maps, escape routes, rally points, means of communication, etc. Sometimes situations go bad, and if you're in one of those situations, you have to defend yourself and your family. So you want to hope for the best, but you also want to be prepared for the worst. In closing, the biggest question is not will there be martial law, but when will there be martial law? It seems to me that we're heading that way right now. So in an argument before the courts, the counsel for the United States spoke to the question of what is martial law. Martial law, it was argued, is the will of the commanding officer of an armed force or over a geographical military department expressed in time of war within the limits of his military jurisdiction as necessary, demands the prudence and dictates restrained or enlarged by the orders of the military chief or supreme executive ruler. That's a lot of jargon, but in other words, it means martial law is imposed by a local commander in the region that he controls on an as-needed basis. Further, it was argued the officer executing martial law is at the same time supreme legislator, supreme judge, and supreme executive. As necessity makes it his will of the law, he can define and declare it, and whether or not it is infringed. And to the extent of the infraction, he alone can judge, and his sole order punishes or acquits the alleged offender. It's too much power for one person to have, but that's how it is in the military. The Navy guys, I can't remember, was there Navy guys in here? If you remember what happens if you're on ship and they try to take over, they mutiny. It's capital punishment, right, for mutiny? Capital punishment. There is no mutiny in the military. In the end, the decision for martial law comes to what the president believes to be an insurrection or a national emergency. So again, I want to thank everybody that came out here and listened to me. Everything that I've talked about today was spawned originally from these three books right here. I wrote Tyrant Book 1 because I wondered what would happen if oath takers decided to stop honoring their oaths. Well, and with the Agenda 21 at the time when I wrote this, now a thing of the past, we've moved on to Agenda 30, which is another topic which I understand I might be coming back to talk about sometime soon. Agenda 30 is a very real thing that the United Nations has wrote up. And it's very real, and it's basically a depopulation program. Don't worry, it's voluntary. But these three books right here is about martial law and the Agenda 30 program. And then, of course, my bestsellers on Amazon is Oath Takers, Book 1 of the Patriot series. These are my nonfiction things, and the Surviving Martial Law, which I'll talk about right now. I got only a few of them left back here. They're almost sold out. And I'm going to be writing a third one. I'm actually working on the third one right now, the program, which is on Agenda 30. I'm going to be spitting that out pretty soon. If you guys want to reach out to me, follow me on these things right here. Facebook, I'm at facebook.com/honoryouroath. And L. Douglas, I'm sorry, not L. Douglas, so it used to be my old website, but now it's ldhogan.com. From there, you can find everything. You can find my books, you can find my podcasts. On Instagram, I'm L.DouglasHogan_author. And I'm on, it says Spotify, but I'm on all podcasting platforms. Anywhere where you might have a podcasting platform, anything, I'm there. I think I'm even in Apple on iPhones, or I'm sorry, iTunes, whatever they're called. But that's that. I want to thank everybody again. And
Okay, wait. Don't be so much in a hurry to sit down. We're going to do some Q&A, and
Yes.
while we do that, ushers, will you pass the donation buckets? Everything that we take up tonight is going to Doug, and if he gave you some good information, don't hesitate to dig deep. And he is going to be back on March 19th to talk about Agenda 2030 and healthcare, I think. And so I have a question over here with Michelle. We're dancing in the aisles here.
I didn't bring any change. I'll put that $100.
First of all, thank you for your service. My husband is a retired Chief Warrant Officer 3. He served 21 and a half years in the Army, and so I have an immense amount of respect for armed service members, so thank you. Had a couple of thoughts. One that crossed my mind when we were talking about the big cities burning, and the movement of the people from the rural areas and the smaller cities to the bigger cities so they could control them. Made me think about the 15-minute cities that's part of the agenda from the World Economic Forum. So I agree with you on that. I do see that coming. A lot of thoughts running through my mind, and we not only have Agenda 2030, but now we got Agenda 2050 as well. And so there's a whole other agenda on the horizon. But my question to you is more of a personal nature. One of the things that my husband and I talk about is our military and the state of our military, given the fact that our border is obviously breached and we're experiencing an invasion. Do you, on a personal level, foresee our military being willing to defend our homeland rather than, and I understand there's a big part of it that's woke, that's weak. It's probably not gonna, they're not going to, but can you foresee some of them breaking their oath to the government and helping the people of this country defend ourselves? Because at this point, we're very vulnerable. We have a lot of terrorist cells, I think, in our country right now. I think we have a lot of unsavory characters. And so I'm just curious on a personal level what you think. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm going to answer that on two fronts if I can. One, as a police officer, because I mentioned that police officers will at first be the front line for this. But it'll be soon be realized that it's not we can't hold it down. And this is actually my book, and this is how I feel, and I've talked to, it's not just me, but other police officers. And this goes, anybody here familiar with the Doctrine of Lesser Magistrates? Yes. Okay, so what it boils down to is sheriffs, okay? When it comes to law, because there's not going to be a whole lot of martial law going on early on until you get those foreign people in, okay? It's going to be down to the sheriff's offices to defend the Constitution. And most sheriffs are pretty good old boys. I don't think too much is going to happen there. Second, and not only that, but I wouldn't, and all the police officers I know would not enforce anything unconstitutional. Seat belts, different things like that, but we're talking big game here with this stuff. No, they're going to go home and be with their families, because who's going to be getting a paycheck during martial law, right? It won't be the law enforcement officers. It's not going to happen. As far as the military goes, point B to what I was thinking, a lot of the officers, commanding officers in charge, are appointed. That's what I don't like. That's the part that scares me. That's the wild card. Because when any president gets in office, they purge out the previous, like they do the cabinet, they appoint their own cabinet, they also purge out the military, high-ranking military guys that don't believe like they believe, right? So the problem with that is that you'll get somebody answering to the president directly because they have the same ideology as the president, telling everybody underneath them, all their subordinates, what's going to happen. Then it comes down, because they're not in the field, right? Those guys are not in the field. They're making decisions from the Pentagon or from wherever their service area is. Then it goes down to the people in the field. And this is where my book comes in so strong, because being a strong veteran and having a lot of military friends myself, I truly believe that there's going to be some old school enlisted guys that's going to say blank that. We're not playing that game. Some of you guys in the military know, like gunnery sergeants and master sergeants and first sergeants, those kind of guys. They don't play this stuff, and they don't take baloney orders. And I don't care if it's unconstitutional. That's where they draw the line. And they got enough backing behind them because all their subordinates back that kind of mentality. They believe in that kind of stuff. Not to contradict what I was saying about young men not caring because they're really gung ho. They are, but they look up to like dads, like father figures. These gunnery sergeants, these master sergeants, first sergeants, they're really high-ranking military guys. So I don't think it will be something like that. I don't think our military is going to play a whole lot of ball. I have seen already a lot of confrontation because I saw a video. I don't know if it was recorded I won't say illegally, I'll say kind of off the cuff recording where it looked like some military guys talking to a master chief. The master chief was telling them, just do your job. I've been doing this for 30 years old, if you've seen this or not. The master chief said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't ask questions, I just get out there and do it. But the people under him was like, we have an oath here. It's just it's unconstitutional what you're asking us to do. And they were calling him out on the carpet for it.
I've seen that.
Okay, so that kind of stuff's going to happen on a wide scale. And then you're going to see military groups, I think, coalesce into bigger military groups, right? So you'll have two high-ranking guys that might know each other, and they got their own armies, each of them, right? So maybe some regimental commanders and stuff like that will be getting together, because they don't always follow after what the guys in Pentagon are talking about. They know that they're appointed, and they know that they're political, and they know that they will be pushing unconstitutional law. Hope that answers your question.
You mentioned the local sheriff being an initial stopgap kind of person. Do you have any wisdom on how we can be talking to our local sheriff regarding things coming down the pike?
If you've got a good sheriff, he's going to be going to some county committee meetings and sitting in. If he's not, maybe he don't like some of the white collars that are there, so he won't be going. Maybe leave a phone call, email him, reach out to him. A lot of sheriffs, they want to hear some good ideas. They just want to hear complaints. That's the thing, because they get griped at a lot. They're an elected person, which is why they get to enforce. They get to choose if they're going to enforce laws or wink, if these things are unconstitutional, not enforce them at all. But yeah, I would say go see them, go talk to them, email them, call them, set up an appointment, do something like that.
Aren't we kind of, with woke and cancel culture, aren't we kind of under martial law right now? It's stopping people from speaking. It's all these things you were talking about. They're getting their way, COVID and everything.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Those, like I mentioned, those are precursors. All right. So the things that we're seeing now with the regulations, when you start seeing curfews, we're going to be really close to that point. But you're right, we're heading that direction now, and I think it's just a matter of time. I've read the back of the book. I know that there's nothing we can do to save the world. You saw what happened if you guys have ever read the book of the Bible at all. After the flood, the people got together, and they were one language and they were one people, and they decided that they were going to build a tower to save themselves in case God ever decided to flood the earth again. We're living that kind of time. There's very spiritual things that are happening right now. Very spiritual things. And not everything that's going on right now is, like you were saying earlier, whoever it was, we're not battling against flesh and blood, but we're battling against principalities and powers and rulers in high places. They're spiritual muppets. Actually, the people are just muppets. And they're spiritual people that are controlling them. But we're heading in that direction. And I've read the back of the book. And you can tell that prophecy that I talked about with the marking, that prophecy was written by John the Revelator in the book of Revelation over 2,000 years ago on the Isle of Patmos. He was exiled because the emperor couldn't kill him. God saved him so many times from being martyred. So he just exiled him because he's freaked out over how he couldn't die. Boiled him in lava, in tar. He wouldn't die. So he just exiled him. And that's where you see the revelation. That technology never existed until today. You see what I'm saying? So we're getting there. It's happening. It's going to be very close. I don't doubt that for a second. Yes. Wait, sorry, back here we got a microphone.
Towards what you're saying, I think that's almost a best case scenario. I think probably what we're going to do is take sporadically the internet down, and then after that, take the electric grid down. And once they take the electric grid down, that's game over. If you're not in a community where you can take care of each other, that's a big challenge.
It's actually one of the executive orders that I showed you that in the event of martial law, that all power supplies will be taken down, they'll be seized. But even more so, what happens if it's not taken down by the government, but it's some sleeper cell?
They can blame it on EOP or the Russians.
They can blame it on anything. But really, with these crowds, we got some very bad people coming in, and I'm not saying that all these immigrants are bad people and they're terrorists, but they're coming in with them. And they're disguised as immigrants, like they're seeking asylum. Well, by definition, they're not to qualify for seeking asylum, you have to be being persecuted by your government. Like being tortured and under threat of being killed if you don't leave. These guys just want a better life, so they're coming over, and I get where they're coming from, but do it the legal way. These guys that are coming here are bad people. You guys saw the video with the terrorist. He was identified. You know, he's loose now. He's walking around the United States, God only knows where. And what if he takes a satchel charge to some electrical place and you know, we're a grid. He can take down a lot if he hits the right grid.
Question, since you're from Illinois, sorry, you mentioned about bringing in UN troops. From what I understand, the governor of Illinois is allowing non-Americans to be in law enforcement in the state of Illinois. Is that correct, or am I incorrect on that?
I think you're incorrect, sir, and it's not because it's probably what he wants to do, but it was actually Nadler that came up with the idea of them being police officers, either Nadler or.
California, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's California.
Pritzker floated it, it's been discussed.
Pritzker's not a good man.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you right now, but he did write a law called Safety Act. It's SAFE, capital T. What it stands for, I don't know. But it made life miserable for police officers. What the Safety Act did was it took away. It basically said that no part-time police, so they did away with all part-time police officers. And so by doing that, well, all these smaller communities that can't afford full-time police officers, now they have no law enforcement. All right. The whole idea, I think, was to keep people out of jail because he got rid of the bail system too. So now people they get arrested, and they get charged, and they get taken in, they're processed, and they're let go. There's no bail anymore. So a person can rob you at gunpoint and walk out that night after he's processed. And and so with these smaller towns that can't have police officers now, it's really set a precedent of crime just kind of running rampant. Would he do it? I don't know. I don't know if he would do that or not, but hopefully he's on his way out because he's been awful.
Well, we already have all the illegal aliens in here, Chinese, Arabs, and we know that the government's stockpiling munitions and weapons. I can see where that could take place.
Okay, yeah, he was saying that there's a lot, probably besides the people that are coming in illegally, a lot of illegal weapons and things that they could get a hold of and kind of act stupid with, and so, yeah, the idea was floated. I did hear that they were wanting to make, because they're not doing gun checks. Like, if you went to buy a firearm right now in Illinois or anywhere, they have to run a background check on you. I mean, it's pretty well the law anywhere, almost anywhere. But they said when the question was raised, are we going to do a background check on these illegal immigrants when they try to purchase a firearm? And immediately all the people left in Congress were like, no. So they don't get checked. Only Americans get checked. My son, he's older now, almost 30, but when I took him to get a driver's license, he had to provide more documentation that he was an American citizen than a legal immigrant that was sitting over here that had no identification whatsoever. He filled out one form and left with a license. That's awful.
I have two questions for you. As a former Illinois resident,
Oh,
I still have family that live in Illinois and property. What do you think of Pritzker's taking of the guns of the people that have them in the state of Illinois? And we've heard that he is talking about if you don't turn your guns over, as he requested, he will take your driver's license away from you also. That's my first question. The second one is, what do you think about him sending the Illinois militia to the Middle East?
he's sending what, the National Guard to
Yeah.
the Middle East? I haven't heard that.
Oh, yeah, he called up 200 of them.
To where?
The Middle
To
East.
the Middle East.
I guess Biden is sending some military over
Yeah.
there. He's not taking firearms yet.
No, but some.
Well, he don't have a fight.
I heard that Texas has its own state military. Is there a mechanism in other states to set up a military, not the National Guard, but a state military that would basically protect the citizens of those states?
Like Texas, I think you're talking about the State Guard. Yeah, so Missouri DeSantis just sent some state guard from Missouri all over also, which I think was a smart move, because the state guard cannot be federalized. In a time of crisis, the president of the United States, or the executive, the commander-in-chief of the military, can take the National Guard and federalize them, essentially making them full-time Army people, or military people, right? So that's the problem that we got with the National Guard right now. By sending over state guard, and Texas, if they have a state guard also, they cannot be federalized because they're, like you said, a state military. Any more
Anybody
questions?
else?
Well, just to add on to that, it was the clips is what he was after, the 30-round clips and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, 30-round magazines?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it wasn't just.
it's, like you said, okay, but he's not gonna find, the whole teeth in the law isn't that he's gonna come and get them. It's if they happen to search your house or your vehicle and find it, then they come at you with the claws, see? And it's the same situation where if we go out and peacefully march, they throw us into jail, but they, that's what I was saying. I think they've already got martial law, see? And it's done without the law.
Yeah, because the law, like we were talking earlier before all y'all came in here, the law doesn't apply to the left. And the reason why it doesn't apply to the left, you can look back at Hillary Clinton, how she destroyed evidence. You look at how the January 6th Democrats destroyed all the evidence, because they were coming close to the truth. And so not only did they delete it, but they encrypted it first before they deleted it. Not only did Hillary Clinton take a hammer to her hard drives, but she deleted everything. She bleach bitted it before she took a hammer to it. But the reason why Democrats aren't held accountable is because they have no morals or standards. What are you going to hold them to? They feel already that the law is going to apply to them, and they don't prosecute each other. It's just how it is. It's awful, but there's no justice system anymore. But Republicans do. Conservative people. I'll just say, no. Well, let's just knock the Democrats and Republicans off. Let's say conservatives and liberals. Conservatives have values. They have ethics. Therefore, you have a standard to be held to. Therefore, you're a hypocrite if you get angry at somebody. You see what I'm saying? They want to throw that up in your face.
How about that, you guys?